Hi, everybody. It's Michael Bennet, and I can't thank you enough for making time on a Friday for this conversation. And I'd like to spend most of our time answering whatever questions you have. So if you have a question or you think you're going to have one, you can dial *3 now. That's *3 now. You don't have to wait for me to finish. And while you're doing that, I'll get us started with a few brief remarks. First of all, it has been wonderful to be back in Colorado. Over the past 2 weeks, I've had the chance to drive nearly 1,300 miles across our state, and I've held about 30 events in 13 different counties. And I came away from those visits with three observations. One, which has been true for the entire time that I've been in the Senate, is that people are working really hard, but they are having a hard time affording some combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, or early childhood education, or daycare. They feel that they can't save, and that their kids are going to live a more diminished life than the life they lived, and they're already having to make choices that their parents didn't have to make. That was true before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has made things more complicated and more difficult. Second, we are in desperate need to invest in America's infrastructure. Anybody who travels rural Colorado or spends time in urban Colorado knows that our roads and bridges are in rough shape. Our water systems are from the 1950s, some before that, and our natural infrastructure, our forests, that are so critical to protecting the watersheds on which we all rely, whether we are living in a city or whether we're a farmer or a rancher. They're desperate for investment. And third, I've never felt more urgency about climate change than I do now. It is hurting our economy in Colorado today. We've had day after day after day this summer with health warnings, and many days when, if you're living on the Front Range, you can't see the mountains. And there were a couple days this year when northern Colorado and Denver had some of the worst, in fact, the worst air quality in the world. But the good news is that we're seeing things change in Washington, D.C. Over the last 20 years or so, Washington has made some decisions that haven't done very much to help average people in Colorado at a time when the economy has been challenging. Washington cut taxes by almost $5 trillion, but almost all the benefit of that went to the wealthiest people in the country. We've spent $5.6 trillion in two wars that lasted for 20 years in the Middle East. And I think the United States has not been investing in our people or infrastructure for a very, very long time, and it shows. But things are beginning to change. Last month, the Senate passed a historic $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill on a bipartisan vote, and it includes the largest ever investment in clean drinking water and wastewater, and the biggest investment in America's bridges since 1950, the largest investment to build a 21st century green energy grid, and something that I've worked on for many years, a bipartisan bill, actually a tripartisan bill. We had a Republican and an independent, based on the work that I've seen in Delta Montrose and Longmont around broadband. We were able to pass that bill as part of this package, and this is going to mean roughly $5 billion right here in Colorado. On top of that, another historic accomplishment this year by the Congress was expanding the child tax credit. The way we got to that was that President Biden signed into law my bill to triple the child tax credit, make it available, to take the child tax credit from $2,000 to $3,000, $3,600 for kids under the age of 6, and to make it fully refundable so the poorest kids in America would benefit from it, and for the first time, and to pay it out on a monthly basis. And families across the country and in Colorado are now receiving a monthly credit of $300 per child under the age of 6 and $250 per child over the age of 6. We're cutting childhood poverty in the country and in Colorado in half this year. And they travel around and meeting parents who are putting food on the table and paying for school supplies without bankrupting their family. A mom in Colorado Springs told me that she was so happy because she was finally able to say yes to her kids instead of saying no, and able to buy a better pair of shoes that would last longer than the shoes she would otherwise buy. So I think that's making a huge difference for families, but we have a lot more to do, and that's why we're working on another package to invest in workers and families and the country's future. There's a lot of details in there, but I'm going to give you a few of my priorities. One is to extend the child tax credit so it doesn't end in December, which would double our childhood poverty rate. This second, I really think we need to pass paid family leave so that Americans can stay home with a sick child or an aging parent without losing their job. And finally, we've got to act urgently on climate. If we don't, I really worry that we're not going to recognize our own state in a few years. And I think all of us refuse to hand our kids and grandkids a state where you can't see the mountains or you can't go outside half the summer, or families live in perpetual fear of wildfire, or drought, and mudslides. And that's why we've got to do everything we can, I think, to push strong measures to cut emissions and to deploy clean energy and invest in restoring, as I mentioned earlier, forest health across the West to reduce the risk of wildfire. So there's a lot of work to do ahead, but I'm more optimistic than I've been in a long time that the agenda in Washington reflects our priorities in Colorado, and that's in large part thanks to the feedback I receive in conversations like this that I can carry back to Washington. So let me just say thank you again for your willingness to make some time for me. I'm going to stop there and take the first question and look forward to our conversation.
Michael, the first question we're going to take is from Greg. He shared a question online, and his question is, I'm very concerned about the rise of anti-democracy. How do you see this situation and what can be done about it?
I'm deeply concerned about it too, Greg. I was there on January 6th when the country was, or the Capitol was invaded by people who were trying to overturn an election. And I think the most important thing that we can do to counter the rise of anti-democracy is to make sure that as a country we're delivering both freedom and opportunity. That is when democracies get into trouble, because where if people feel like there's not opportunity, if people feel like they can't get ahead or their family can't get ahead, those are the moments that tyrants, create false promises for people and try to seize power, and that's when anti-democratic forces arise. When people see their costs going up and their income staying flat, and they feel like the democracy isn't doing anything for them, it makes the democracy vulnerable to authoritarianism. And as I mentioned, politicians that are offering false promises of prosperity to consolidate their power. That's been true going back to ancient Rome, and the founders of this country were well aware of it, and that's why I've been so focused on things like expanding the child tax credit and on the infrastructure bill to invest in America so that people can actually see that democracy can still work. And I'd say even beyond that, we've got a real challenge on our hands because of the rise of totalitarianism around the world, and China's very evident belief, they say it every time we sit down at a negotiating table with them, that our best days are over. The democracy won't work. That's what they're selling the rest of the world. That's what China and Russia and Iran are telling the rest of the world because of January 6th. So I think for humanity's sake and for our own sake, we need to have an economy in this country that when it grows for everybody, not just the people at the very top and that's what I'm working to try to do.
Thanks, Michael. Our next question is from Annalise. Annalise, I'm going to let you ask your question now.
I want to thank you so much for naming childcare as a need for families in our state, and I would love to hear from you how you're leading on ensuring that there's going to be robust funding for childcare and early education in negotiations around Biden's Build Back Better plan.
Yeah, thanks, Annalise. I really appreciate it. That is a topic I care deeply about, in part because I used to be the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, where we led an effort to expand in 1 year because Denver citizens had voted for a sales tax increase. We expanded the number of slots for 4-year-olds by 2,000 in 1 year, and it's made a big difference in outcomes for kids. And it is a place where I've literally, I've had many other conversations like this too, but I can remember one in particular in Edwards, where everybody in the room was crying because of their frustration of their inability to get any child care. They have no access to it. And when they do have access to it, they have to pay an incredible amount of money for that access. And what we're trying to do in the reconciliation bill is create a large federal commitment. Obviously, the federal government can't do it by itself, to work with state and local communities to deliver universal child care or preschool for people. We learned during the pandemic how difficult it was for people to serve on the front lines of our health crisis without any child care. And people can't work if they don't have child care. And if it's unaffordable, women in particular often have to stay at home because it's too expensive to pay for child care. And so they give up their careers for this. It is a broken system. So I don't think we're going to get all the way in this reconciliation bill, but I think we can get a good start. We also have to figure out as a society how to value the people that teach kids in early childhood education or in daycare, because I've been in north of Pueblo at a child care center there where they said they were losing people to Dairy Queen because Dairy Queen was paying more than they were able to pay for the kids in their care, and that's just wrong.
Thanks. Next, we have Kathy from Larimer County. Kathy, thanks for asking your question.
Oh, hi, Senator Bennet. Hello.
Hi, Kathy. How are you?
Oh, well, I've been better. I just want to say thank you for being our senator. I think you're doing a really good job, and you seem very calm, and that's good because I'm not feeling that way today, especially after what's happened in Texas. I know people who've had back alley abortions. I was born in 1946, so I was around before Roe v. Wade, and I'm really upset about what they're doing in Texas. And furthermore, they've created a vigilante society. This is un-American.
Sure.
Do you have any idea what we can do about this?
Well, let me say, first of all, Kathy, it is deeply, deeply upsetting. And my friend John Tester, who's a senator from Montana, he's the last farmer really in the Senate. He often says that his daughter is having to fight for things that his wife didn't have to fight for because his grandmother fought for those rights, and now it's all at risk. And this has been something that I've worried about for a long time. I think this is a decision that should be a decision made by a woman in consultation with her loved ones, and if she chooses in consultation with professionals and a doctor. And that should be federal law. It shouldn't be an accident of what state you live in. And the fact that the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear the case is very, very, or wouldn't stay the law so it could hear a case, is very, very troubling to me, and incredibly alarming, I guess is a better word for it. And what we can do now is make sure that our state protects a woman's right to choose, which we have done. And I think we have to fight for it on the national level. And I may sound calm, and I am calm, but we got a big fight on our hands here. And in terms of these rights and lots of other things, the stuff we saw on January 6th. But the thing is, it's a fight worth having because the democracy's at stake. And I can't think of anything that it would be more worth handing over to our kids and our grandkids than a thriving democracy and one where women have control over their own health care. The last point I'll make about it is a particularly troubling bill for the reason that you said, which is that it turns, fellow citizens into informants. I cannot believe that that's something that the American people are going to sign up for more broadly. And I think Texas, I hope, is likely to be isolated. Unfortunately, on this score, already women have had such a tough time getting access there that Colorado is a place people know to come to. And I hope we keep it that way.
Next, we have Ellen. Ellen, you're welcome to ask your question and let us know where you're from too, please.
Hi, I'm from Westminster in Adams County. And Senator Bennet, I appreciate you saying you feel urgency over the climate crisis, but you need to act in line with that urgency. And your vote to prohibit banning fossil fuel development on public lands was so unacceptable. And your vote to support a liquefied natural gas export terminal in Texas was so unacceptable. And to prevent more severe climate crisis than we already face, we have to end extracting and burning fossil fuels, period. We have to do that. And I want to know, when will you start acting in line with your words on the climate crisis? This is, everything else we face pales in the face of the climate crisis.
Well, I appreciate very much your question and your candor, and I'm sorry that I disappointed you with those votes. I don't regret those votes because I believe very strongly that if we are ever going to actually get off fossil fuels, we have to have a plan to transition off of fossil fuels. I don't believe that we can just get off them tomorrow and be done with it without driving energy prices through the roof. And if we drive energy prices through the roof, then you're never going to get climate policy done because people are going to say, I can't support my family. What we need is a thoughtful approach over the next 10 and 20 and 30 years to get this economy to a net zero carbon economy. That's where I believe we need to head. That's why I'm for a price on carbon. That's why I'm for a clean electricity standard, a clean energy standard. That's why, it's related to this. I've got $50 billion in the reconciliation package to desperately to invest in our forests in a way that will protect our watershed from more damage from climate change. So there's a lot for us to do, but that is the reason why I took those votes, and I appreciate very much you giving me the opportunity to explain it. If we don't have a plan for how to get to net zero by 2050, then we're not ever going to do it, and we need to have one that the American people can support. And I think that they are more of a mind of the direction that I've headed than one that would suggest that we can tell them, frankly, a fairy tale that tomorrow we can just shut off our fossil fuels.
Next, we have Kenneth from Boulder. Thanks, Kenneth.
I'll say one other thing. I'd say one other thing about that, though, just for interest. Those votes get put on the floor as a way of, creating. It's about creating political damage for people in an election cycle. It's not, and I just think it's very important to be consistent on these matters so that in the end we actually can create, a plan that we act urgently on, but one that will last from administration to administration so that we really help solve this problem for our kids. Sorry, Amy, I should let you go.
That's all right. Kenneth, are you there? Go ahead if you are.
Yes, hello. We were just talking about the concerns about the bill in Texas that ends abortion. And another thing about Texas has been the voting suppression acts that have been recently passed there and in many states. And I feel like that this is a fundamental threat to democracy. And the only way we can stop these things is through a vote in the Senate affirmatively for the People Act and for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And the only way that that's going to occur in the Senate is if there are changes in the rules regarding the filibuster. Either some kind of a carve-out for constitutional rights and voting rights or something like that. And Senator, I'm wondering what you can do to help make that happen.
Thank you, Kenneth. I appreciate it very much. Well, first of all, this is the biggest attack on voting rights that we've seen since the 1960s. I deeply regret it because I think a lot of it was sort of spawned by President Trump's attacks on the election, which his own Homeland Security people, political appointees in his administration, his own freaking Attorney General, who I don't really like very much, they all said that there were no grounds for his complaint that the election was stolen from him, and yet we're now trying to dispossess across many states the American people from their right to vote. It's shameful, and I feel so lucky to live in a state where Republicans and Democrats working together created one of the best fraud-free voter systems in America that has the second highest voter participation rate in the country. That's what we should be heading for, and that's why we should be passing the voting legislation in the Senate. And to do that, we are gonna need to change some rules, and maybe not just the filibuster. But I think that's okay, because what we're faced with is not a great tradition of the United States Senate, but Mitch McConnell's modern abuse of the filibuster, and which has brought the Senate to its knees. I think the Senate, I don't want the Senate to become the House, but I think we can change so that the majority is just in charge. But I think we can change the Senate so that the minority has a right to have meaningful debate, which they don't have in the House of Representatives, and a right to try to amend legislation as it goes through, which they don't have in the House of Representatives. And at the same time, that after all that is said and done, the majority ought to be able to make a decision with 51 votes. And all of that, which, by the way, is the way the founders designed the Senate. They knew supermajorities created what they called, quote, enfeebled government. And so where they wanted supermajorities, they put them in the Constitution, like ratification of treaties. Otherwise, it was majority rule. And over the years, it's become very undemocratic as a result. And I think if we change the rules the way I just described and the Republicans took over, they wouldn't change the rules. They'd leave them the same, because I think the American people would see a functional Senate, and they'd appreciate a functional Senate, especially when we're in the kind of competition we're in with China, and we can't afford to not be able to get stuff done just because of procedural problems or procedural obstacles that, frankly, none of these state legislators that are passing this anti-voting legislation across the state, none of them has a filibuster. So they're doing it without it, and they're doing what they want to do. And I think at the national level, that's what we ought to do. On whether to make an exception just for voting rights, we certainly could do that, but everybody should understand that once you make an exception for voting rights, you've made an exception for anything anybody wants to make an exception for, which is why I think we'd be better off just saying to the American people, here's how we want to make the Senate function better, for all of you. And I'd like to come home to Colorado, to red parts of the state and blue parts of the state, and explain why we made the change that we did. And then the last thing I'll say is we cannot allow the intransigence in Washington to prevent us from going to the polls and voting. You know, sometimes I hear people say, if you don't pass Senate Bill 1, the voting rights bill, the democracy's over. That's not true. What we have to do is get people to understand that there's voter suppression going on all over the country. People are trying to keep other people from voting, and it's more important than ever that we show up. Just like John Lewis, who that bill is named for. You know, sometimes when people say, "Oh, it's too hard, it's too much work," and I think about John Lewis subjecting his head to the billy clubs on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the sake of our democracy. And I think all we're being asked to do is something that's 100 that hard, which is to make sure we get every single person in this country who's eligible to vote, registered to vote, and then we get every single person to the polls. And I think we can do it.
Thanks, Michael. For everybody who's listening in, we just want to remind you to press *3 if you have a question. So you are welcome to ask a question by pressing *3. Our next question is an online question. This question is from Irma, and she is asking you what you're doing to protect Colorado's watersheds and water supply.
Irma, it's a great question. You know, for those that don't know this, almost everybody in Colorado does know this, but our water mostly comes from the mountains, and it comes from snowpack in our forests, and it's like a big reservoir. And that's why our farmers and ranchers are so concerned about what the snowpack looks like. But every ski resort depends on it. Every single town and community in Colorado depends on it. And we had our three worst wildfires in Colorado's history last year as a result of climate change. And I did some work on this to see what it would take to protect our watersheds in the West. And the answer I got back was about $60 billion. That might sound like a ton of money, but we spent $60 billion the last 4 years or 5 years fighting fires. And we spent that $60 billion fighting fires at a cost of $50,000 an acre. If we did it by doing forest mitigation and watershed restoration up front, we can do it for a cost of $1,500 an acre, $1,500 versus $50,000. So I wrote that bill. It's called the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act. 2/3 of the money goes to federal agencies, 1/3 to states and local communities. And it is the president included the title of the bill in his reconciliation proposal. It is in the budget that's going through the Senate right now. I sit on the Agriculture Committee, where I've been. That's the committee I've been on the longest of any other committee, and that's where it's getting done right now. And I think it's going to make a big difference to Colorado and to the Western United States. It'll create jobs and put young people and veterans and others to work in our forests, protecting our watersheds and making the investment in our national forests that we have failed to make for generations. So I'm very hopeful that this will be passed as part of the reconciliation package this fall.
Next, we have Nancy from Fort Collins. Nancy, thanks for going ahead and asking your question.
Senator, I'm wondering what you're going to do to try to help us buy drugs, for example, through Canada, where we can get them much less expensively than we do here in the United States.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for that question. You know, I understand why people want to be able to buy drugs from Canada, because they are so much cheaper than they are in the United States. Of course, that's the result of a negotiation based on the number of people that are in Canada that are in their single-payer healthcare system up there. The minute Americans started to buy drugs from up there, the pharmaceutical companies would just start renegotiating that deal, and the prices would go up for Canadians. I think we'd be a lot better off lowering drug prices for people right here in America. That's what we need to do, and it needs to be real, because people are just getting crushed when they walk up to the pharmacy window at their local pharmacy, or when they order their prescription drugs over the internet. It is terrible, and we have got to create a situation where Medicare has the right to negotiate drug costs, just like, the Canadian system has the right to negotiate drug costs. And we ought to be having in mind what the international, prices look like for drugs as we do that. That's part of the reconciliation package as well. And I just had a conversation 2 days ago with the Senate Finance Committee chairman and members. I serve on that committee, and drug prices was a big topic of conversation. So this is a big priority for the president. It's a big priority for us.
Next, we have Paula from Glenwood Springs. Paula, thanks for asking your question.
Senator Bennet, thank you so much for serving our country. I'm very grateful for all that you do. I actually sit on the council for Glenwood Springs, and you've done a lot for our community as far as post-fire and what's happening with our interstate highway going through Glenwood Canyon. My question revolves more around affordable housing. I think it impacts our mountain communities, it impacts our economies, and I think even on a bigger scale, it impacts big city. It's a sister to high-priced childcare, and it increases the propensity for our population to go homeless. I'm wondering what you can do at a federal level and what's been done already.
Yeah, thanks, Paula, and thanks for what you do. And I never thought that I'd have a summer where I went over Ravenier's Pass twice in 2 days, but this summer I did because of the closure of I-70. And on the housing prices, I was recently in Carbondale, and somebody told me that you couldn't get into that housing market now for less than $400,000. There's not a community in Colorado where people are not struggling for workforce housing. I had a meeting last night up in Fort Collins. There's a bunch of housing folks there trying to think through the workforce housing issues there. I've had conversations all over the state, and I've also put together a group of about 40 people from all walks of life, from policymakers to home builders and everybody in between, to meet 4 or 5 times on this subject and come up with a series of recommendations based on what we could do at the local level, the state level, the federal level, what the private sector could do as well. And I'm extremely anxious to get those recommendations because we've got a disaster on our hands. I do not want us to become, a place like San Francisco or Seattle where, teachers and firefighters and police officers and early childhood education people and just lower level employees, they can't afford to live there. I mean, this is not the kind of place we want to be as a state. I was on the phone this morning with Jeff Bridges, who's a state senator from Colorado, talking to him about how the $400 million is going to be, that we have sent, the federal money we've sent to the state, that the state has decided to spend on developing affordable housing and workforce housing and to address homelessness. And I can't talk about the details of that conversation right now, but I do think we have a real opportunity to use that money to lever other money to build a lot more housing than historically we have. One of the big issues for me in all this is we got all these people, in Colorado paying rent to folks that live out of state. All that economic activity is just going out of state every single month. And I think there might be the opportunity through some creative ideas that the governor's team and the legislature is thinking about to build housing in a way that allows the benefits of it to actually remain, the economics of it, at least some of it, to remain here in Colorado, building more housing. There's some very creative ideas around this. So that's what we've got to do. It's an urgent problem, and it is. I think it is central. I mean, these issues around housing and childcare and healthcare and higher ed, these are all central to whether or not people in this state are going to be able to feel like they can live a middle-class life or get into a middle-class life. And housing's right at the top of that list.
Next, we have a question from Melinda. She asked her question online, and she's interested in an update on the future of Space Command in Colorado Springs.
I think the future of Space Command is going to be bright in Colorado Springs. I was down there for the Space Symposium last week. I spoke to the commanding officer, not about the location, but just about how important the mission is, and he's obviously didn't say that to me. He knows that, but we had a conversation about how important the mission is. A mission that becomes more important every single day because of what our adversaries are doing around the world. And it makes absolutely no sense for us to move it to Alabama because we just end up spending a whole bunch of money recreating facilities that already exist in Colorado where, we've got the Joint Space Command, Space Force missions. We've got a huge amount of intelligence missions that are here that are related to space. And I'm sorry to say this, but it was an arbitrary and political decision by Donald Trump made in the last week of his presidency to punish Colorado. And he said it himself not 2 weeks ago. He said, other people wanted other things. I alone made the decision, he said, to move what he called Space Force. He didn't even know, I don't think he ever knew the difference between the two. But it was Space Command that he said he was moving. We're going to fight like crazy to keep it here. John Hickenlooper's going to fight like crazy to keep it here. The whole delegation will. And I believe that we can convince this administration that it is, rather than spending the money moving it purposely to fulfill Donald Trump's punishment of Colorado, that what we ought to do is spend that money prosecuting the mission, which is so vital to our country's national security.
Our next question is from Stephen. Stephen, thanks for letting us know where you're from and asking your question.
Sure, yeah. This is Steve, Senator from Boulder.
Hey.
Hey, say, you were talking about plans with the administration, and we need plans. Would you support a plan that this administration would present, a plan to get U.S. citizens and SIB people out of Afghanistan? And do you think the taxpayers or the U.S. government are going to pay hostage monies to get these people out?
Are going to pay what kind of money, did you say?
Well, I'm calling them hostage.
Yeah.
Hostage monies to get these people out, because I think the Taliban, as we all know, are not good people.
No. No, I mean, it's a tragedy what's happened in Afghanistan. I think we're going to have now, I think, the chance to think a lot about what happened over the last 20 days, but also I'd say the last 20 years. I mean, I think it is unconscionable that we have been there as long as we have been there, and I'm incredibly grateful for the troops that went there to serve, even without the political leadership in a variety of administrations defining what the mission was, which is not our troops' fault. It's the political leadership, and we failed them. I think we should be continuing to try to get out as many people as we can that were our partners in the work. The 126,000 folks that came out. There is, I mean, that's obviously a very large number. But if there are others that are SIB folks, or we got to continue to work to get them out and find ways of resettling them here in the United States. And that's what I think we got to do. We are helping to pay their way here, which is not the same, obviously, as paying hostage to the Taliban.
Next, we have Marty from Lafayette.
Hi, Senator
Go
Bennet.
ahead, Marty. Yep.
Oh,
Hi, Marty.
thank you. Hi,
Hi.
Senator Bennet. Thank you for all you're doing. Can you hear me all right?
I hear you perfectly. Yes.
Okay. I'm a former Ohioan who, like many retirees, have moved to this beautiful state of Colorado to be near my family, my daughter's family and grandchildren. And one of the things that struck me very hard for both me and for my family is the air quality here in Lafayette, in Boulder County, and also in Denver, where my grandchildren live. And so I became very interested in trying to research why the air quality is the way it is, why we face so many ozone alerts day in and day out, especially in the summer. And one thing that came to my attention in the Denver area is the Suncor factory. And reading articles, I've learned that Suncor has basically not met federal emissions standards for toxic gases for probably about 15 years now. And I guess I have to ask the question, how should they be held accountable? Is that up to state officials? Is that due to permits that are issued to them telling them what the levels are? Or is it something that the EPA should be monitoring and, trying to correct? How can we get this situation turned around?
Well, Marty, first of all, it breaks my heart. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. It is those of us that were in Colorado before these air quality problems. We used to obviously have even terrible ones back in the old days when we had the brown cloud. But when we moved here in '97, you never thought about not being able to go outside because of air quality issues. And I don't want to leave a state to our kids where that's true. And I particularly hate the idea of you're moving. I lived in Columbus for a couple of years from Ohio to here in search of clean air and not having it. So let me just, Suncor, you've done more research on that than I have. I have made a note, and I will go explore the question about why it is and whether it's state or whether it's federal and whether there's something we can do about that. So I don't have an answer for you on that now, but I will. This is a perfect piece of work for me to do, so I'm grateful for you putting it on my plate. The other things we can do is make sure that every single molecule of fugitive methane is captured from our pipelines and from the drilling rigs in Colorado. We passed the law in Colorado to do that when John Hickenlooper was governor. We had a law on the books when Barack Obama was president that was based on Colorado's law. And then Donald Trump removed that, stripped that law from the books, even though, there wasn't anybody in the industry that was asking him to do it. You just did it. And so we're going to put it back, and that's incredibly important because it's one of the most toxic greenhouse gases that there is, fugitive methane. And then finally, we have got to have an approach on managing our forests that makes them less susceptible to these chronic wildfires that we're having, and that requires us to be very serious about climate change, and in the short term, make the kind of investment I've been talking about to deal with the most dangerous parts of those forests.
Our last question is from Wendy in Jefferson County. Wendy, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, Mr. Bennet.
Hi.
We are wondering why our health insurance has gone up by 24% within the last 2 years. And is there any way to kind of curb those increases so they don't go up anymore? Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for asking. I'd be curious offline who your insurer is, because most rates have not actually gone up like that in Colorado because of the credits that we've been able to extend from the Affordable Care Act. I think having drug prices negotiated would be a help to reducing insurance costs, and I also believe that having a true public option that, like the one Tim Kaine and I have proposed called Medicare X, that would create more competition for private carriers and allow everybody in America to decide whether they wanted to stay on their health insurance or go on a plan that's administered by Medicare. That would be a huge benefit to covering the people that are not yet covered, and also to driving insurance prices down. And I wanted to say thank you, Wendy, because I actually started my day today in Jefferson County, and the people there were extremely pleasant.
I think we have, Michael, some closing remarks from you, and just want to remind everybody of our Denver office phone number to reach out to our team. You can reach us at 303-455-7600. And if you didn't get to ask your questions, or you were asked your question in the queue, our team will be following up with you to make sure we have a chance to respond to all of your questions in person as well.
Amy, shall I finish here?
Yeah, I think you can wrap up here.
Well,
yep.
Look, I just want to end again by, actually, I'll give you my office number again. It's 303-455-7600. We're happy to work with you on any issues, healthcare or immigration or anything else that you need from us. And I'll just finish by saying this has been a tough year, for our state and for the country. It's been a tough few years for our state and for the country. And I think that we've got a chance now, because the most people in our country's history that ever voted during the pandemic didn't keep them away from the polls. We had more people vote for Joe Biden than any presidential candidate. I think maybe more people voted for Donald Trump than the last time. There were a ton of people voted this year, and that's bought us time. We have faced, I think, in some sense, a near-death experience with our democracy, and now it's up to all of us, I think, to work together to create an economy that, when it grows for everybody, not just people at the very top, that we are investing in our communities in ways that allows us to live, so that we've got housing we can afford, and our kids have a good place to go to early childhood education, just to take two examples of things we talked about in the call today, to deal with our air quality and make sure that we are transitioning to a clean energy economy. I mean, we have no shortage of stuff for us to do, and we have to do it all at the same time that we're in competition with societies across the country that are not themselves democracies. And I don't think we're going to do that by screaming at each other. I don't think we're going to do it by just repeating what we hear on the cable television at night. I think we do it by bearing down and doing the really hard work that our Americans have done since the founding of the country to achieve things that to them seem like they ought to be self-evident, like the idea that women ought to have the right to vote. Just take that as an example. We have our own set of challenges now, and it's going to be tough. It's never easy. It's never as easy as it's supposed to be. But I really believe that, having stared into the abyss on January 6th, that the American people are going to come together in a way to invest in each other, to invest in our children, to invest in our infrastructure, and to build a stronger democracy. And I'm just so grateful that in so many ways Colorado is leading these discussions, and I'm very grateful that all of you spent a little bit of your weekend with me. I look forward to seeing you again in person, and keep writing my office. We keep calling my office. We take all of that extremely seriously. So thank you, Amy, for presiding over this, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Michael. And again, our office number is 303-455-7600, and we'll make sure to reach back out to you if we didn't get to answer your question live today. So you can look forward to hearing from us next week. Thanks, everybody, for your participation. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.